So my story is I grew up in a very country area. I grew up in rural areas. My grandparents had a farm nearby. I hunted. I had ATVs. I went off-roading. I drove a pickup truck. And when I felt called into ministry, when I knew God was calling me to do what I do now in youth ministry, I was like, yeah, I'll do that. But I want to stay in the country. That's where I'm comfortable. That's where I grew up. I'm a rural boy. I want to stay in the country. Well, I went to college in a place called Geneva College in a town called Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. And I know what you're sounding. Beaver Falls? That sounds pretty redneck. It was the hood. It really was the ghetto. I lived there for 8 years. And in that time of living in Beaver Falls, I had drive-by shootings happen, drug deals, I witnessed. They happened actually right in front of my house. There were gangs activity. Actually, the house next door to ours was a meth lab. It was the hood. And so God took this country boy out of the country and he put me in the ghetto. Talk about shell shock. We're going to read over the next few weeks about Daniel and his friends and how God took them away from their comfort zone and placed them in a new land and did some awesome things through them. So let's read Daniel chapter 1. We're going to just read part of the chapter. Verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his gods in Babylonia and put them in the treasury of the house of his gods. So, yeah, they were captured and they were taken to a different land. Verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, or however you say that name, chief of the court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from royal families and noble births. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve the king in his palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of Babylonians. So he's like, take these men away from their home and teach them all about how to be a Babylonian. So Daniel was one of these guys. Daniel, he was from a royal or noble family, and he was highly educated. He was a smart guy, kind of like me. Yeah, okay, sure. But Daniel, he was taken out of what was normal for him, and he went from being a nobility to being a slave. Daniel went from being educated in Jewish laws and customs to being re-educated in Babylonian laws and customs. This was a stretch. Verse 5. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. There they were trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those that were chosen from some of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Messiah, and Azariah. The chief officials gave them new names. Daniel, the name he named Belshazzar. Hananiah, he called Shadrach. Mishael, he called Meshach. And to Azariah, he called Abednego. He changed their names. Not only did they be taken out of their country and had to learn all this new stuff, they had to change their names. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officials for permission not to defile himself in that way. Now God had caused the officials to show favor and compassion on Daniel, but the officials told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned you food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men of your age? The king will have my head because of you. He's like, I would do this, but the king, if he sees that you don't look as good as the other officials, it's going to be my fault. He's going to take off my head. Daniel, he wasn't just being picky eater. There was certain dietary laws that the Jewish people had, and these were going against the dietary laws. Like, I have a 3-year-old son, Theo, and he's a picky eater. Like, he eats fruit bars, granola bars, milk, some juice, sometimes chicken nut. But other than that, he's like, no, don't want it. No, don't want it. And he's really difficult sometimes to get to eat. There's things he likes, but he's just trying to be difficult and trying to, he's kind of picking his way through, saying, I just don't want it. Daniel's not doing that. Daniel's not trying to be stubborn. Daniel's not trying to be picky. Daniel's not trying to be a problem. He's just saying, God has instructed us on how we should eat in these dietary laws for Israelites, and I'm not going to defile myself. He didn't want to change the Babylonian culture. He wasn't saying, hey, we do it this way and you should do it too. You guys are horrible for the things that you eat. No, he wasn't doing any of that. He wasn't trying to be arrogant. I'm better than you because I don't eat this. No, he didn't do any of that. He's just saying, it's not me versus Babylon. He's saying, I stand for God, and this is what God has instructed me to do. And he's asking permission to do that. But, the chief official's like, I'm not so sure about that. So let's look at verse 11. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants according to what you see. He's like, let's just give it a test. Let's give it a try and see what happens. And so they're like, and they reluctantly agreed. Verse 14. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guards took away their choice food and their wine and to drink, and gave them vegetables instead. So although the Babylonians were trying to get Daniel to do something that was against God's law, Daniel was respectful. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't rude. He wasn't, trying to be a problem. He was just trying to say, this is what God wants from me. There's a lot of really messed up stuff in our culture. Stuff that we know is against God's law. Things that are being passed off as right, even though we know that they're wrong. Christians are often seen as behind the times or intolerant or uneducated because of things that God has called us to believe. It's easy to look at our culture and say, we need to fight this. We need to fight against it. It's us versus them. What the government is doing is wrong. What society is doing is wrong. What we're being taught in school is wrong. We need to rebel against it and fight for what's right. Nah. It's very easy to have that mentality, but very few times does God call us to fight against our culture and be that rebellion. In fact, he tells us something very opposite in the book of Romans. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. Let's read it. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authorities is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Well, okay, Paul wrote this, so maybe Paul just lived in a time where the government was a pretty good government, and, God put it there, and everything was great. No. So, Paul wrote this in a time where there was an emperor in Rome called Nero. Nero was a bad dude. So have you ever seen those Roman movies where there's the Colosseum and there are people fighting? Sometimes there's like this big, like massive centurion that has like this big armor on and all these massive weapons. And then there are these few guys that are like barely clothed and they have a stick and they're supposed to be fighting. Yeah, the guy with the stick that had like no armor, those were Christians. Or have you seen those people where they put a big tiger or a lion or something like that, and these guys who barely have any weapons are supposed to be fighting the tiger or basically surviving the tiger? Yeah, those were Christians. Nero was such a bad dude that he hated the Christians so much that he would capture them, throw them in the Colosseum, and basically have them killed in the most entertaining way for people to watch. That is the government that Paul is saying that you should obey and not rebel against. Because God put that in authority. Yeah, that's the government that Paul's talking about. He said, be subject to the authority. Don't rebel against them. Wow, that's hard. That is really, really hard. Why would God want us to be respectful of an evil and corrupt government? Why would he do that? Why would he say that? Well, I think it's because authority problems are transferable. If we struggle to obey our parents, we will struggle to obey God. If we struggle to obey our teachers at school, we're going to struggle to obey God. If we struggle to obey our coaches, our pastors, our government, whatever authority that is placed in front of you, if you struggle to obey them, you will struggle to obey God. Because once you start rebelling against authority and saying, I don't have to listen to you anymore, who is it that's in charge? When we push authority away, we are elevating ourselves to a higher authority level. We're saying, I'm the only one in control of me. And when that nature gets soaked into our head and into our heart, then why do we need God if we are in control? God says, be respectful of those authorities that he's placed in front of you, even ones that do horrible things. Can you be respectful even when you disagree? Yeah. It says in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. I tell students this all the time. Say as an authority figure, I say we're going to be doing this in this way, certain thing in this way, but you may have a better idea. There's two ways of handling that. I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. I can do that better on my own. And right away, as the authority figure, I just stopped listening. You come at me with attitude, and I'm not even going to listen to your good idea about it. It doesn't matter if it's a good idea or a bad idea. I quit listening. But if you listen to what the authority says, and you really soak it in, and you obey what they tell you, but gently go to them after you've obeyed and said, hey, I was wondering if maybe this could be a better way. I was just thinking this might be a possibility. Hey, you're being respectful and you're listening. There's a lot better chance of the authority listening to what you have to say. You might have a better idea, but when you come to them with arrogance and rebellion, they're not going to listen. But when you come to them with respect and obedience, hey, you might actually get your way. Let's continue reading in Daniel chapter 1, verse 17 through 20. To those 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters of the kingdom. So Daniel is able to stand for what's right. He stands for what the Lord requires of him, and he retains his integrity, all while having a appealing witness throughout the whole land. Because whenever they see how great Daniel is and how well he served, they're like, hey, there's something different about these guys. And they were elevated to a high status. Too often, Christians are known for what they're against rather than what they are for. Yes, we need to fight for the truth. We need to obey the Lord, whatever that is, regardless of what culture says. Sometimes we need to go against culture in order to stand for what's right. But to truly follow God, we must be respectful and submit to the authorities that God has placed over us. We honor God by honoring those in positions above us. So how should we submit to authorities God has placed over you and still obey God and put Him first? Well, it's kind of a tricky thing. But there are 4 things I want you to remember as you wrestle with this idea of how to, be respectful of authority and still obey God. There are 4 things I want you to think about. The first thing is respect doesn't always mean agreement. Have you ever watched that show Duck Dynasty? I know it's not on anymore, but it was a really good show when it was on. Well, the grandfather of that show, Phil Robertson, he said, and it's a really cool quote, "Our culture has accepted 2 huge lies. The first is that if you disagree with someone's lifestyle, you must fear or hate them. The second is that if you love someone means you agree with everything they do or believe. Both are nonsense. You don't have to compromise conviction to be compassionate." So that's the first thing. Respect doesn't always mean agreement. Number 2, listen quicker than you speak. Sometimes when you disagree, it's so easy to just jump down people's throat and say, that's wrong and here's why it's wrong. But if you listen to people, if you listen to what they have to say and don't speak right away, people will be more likely to listen to you when you have something to say. There's also a scripture passage that we'll read that says this very same thing, but we're going to do that in some small group time. Number 3, you can't argue people into believing. Very few times can you change someone's belief by arguing with them. Most likely, you're going to get entrenched in your choice, and they'll get entrenched in their choice, and you're just going to butt heads. And everybody loses at that point. You can't argue people into believing. And the last thing, if you have to disobey authority, if there is no way to honor authority and still honor God and obey God, God's law is supreme. But when you choose to disobey authority in order to obey God, you must be ready to accept the consequences of that choice. There may be negative consequences. You may be punished for doing the right thing, and you have to be ready to accept those consequences. We're going to split up into our small group time and have a little bit of discussion about these very things. But I want to thank you so much for listening to this, and I hope that you have a great small group discussion. I'll see you next time.